And so all of a sudden you take this potentially sad or awkward or embarrassing moment and it becomes this fodder, for something fun and spontaneous. And so I think for me, it's always been tricky because it's hard for me to call them sad because I'm already going, oh, this is just now what's on the production line, send it on down,
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Dave Barnes is a singer-songwriter and the co-host of the Dadville podcast. He's also a stand-up comedian, though he's just as funny when he's sitting down, swapping stories. This episode, the 2021 finale of the Sad Stories Told for Laughs series, was originally released in video form as part of the Rabbit Room's online conference, Hutchmoot Homebound. The occasional silences you will hear in this recording are mostly Dave Barnes wheeze-laughing at his own hilarious stories. Dave Barnes, I'm so glad that you are on this very special episode of the Habit Podcast, which is
yes.
video and also part of the Sad Stories Told for Laughs series. So.
I like that your face sort of changed when you did that.
Yeah, right.
You honored the sadness, but you changed your visage.
So a couple months ago, I went to see you play at the Ryman Auditorium.
Yes.
A friend of mine called me in the afternoon and said, "Hey, I got 2 tickets to see Dave Barnes play tonight. You want to go?" I was like, "Sure." And we're getting there, the seats were amazing. I'm like, "How are we getting such great seats?" He goes, "Oh, well, one of the band members got sick, and these are his parents' seats, and they didn't want to, if he wasn't playing, they'd we don't want to come all the way downtown and find parking just to see Dave."
The only reason we see Dave is our son.
But it was a great show, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
I loved it. But you told one story, that when you told the story, I'm like, I got to get Dave Barnes on Sad Stories Told for Laughs. And it was a story, I don't want to tell too much, but there was a guy who came up on stage.
Yes, I know
the story I'm talking about?
Yeah, I was there.
You want to tell that story?
Yeah, so it is funny that you would say sad stories because this was a sad night for me. This really did start the sort of like phoenix that rose from these ashes were sad ashes, which is the name of my next record. But it's an instrumental. But I was playing a show with Matt Wirtz, who's one of my dearest friends, and we've played a million shows together. And we were playing at this place called the Windjammer in South Carolina. And it was that perfect storm, maybe pun intended with the name of the venue, where we couldn't tell if the crowd was there to see us or to get drunk. Okay. But it definitely wasn't both. It was one or the other. And so the whole night, Matt and I decided hey, let's just split the show up. Nobody open for anybody. Let's just do 3 songs and then he'll come out and do 3 songs and I come back out and do 3 songs. Do it over about an hour and a half and that's the night. Well, as the show keeps going, I'm getting more discouraged. Some therapists would call it sadness. So I'm really getting in my head. I'm really starting to feel man, because about every 3 or 4 songs, somebody kind of turn around and be like, "Hey, it's good." And I was like, "Oh, I got them." And then to be then they're back to their bruise. And so it's really getting and I think it's getting so bad that they can tell. I'm starting to talk less, and I'm just kind of playing the songs, and I'm sort of grieving decisions of my career and things like that, just sort of meta moments. And so I sort of look down and I'm singing, and out of the corner of my eye, I see someone jump on stage.
Yeah. And
I'm thinking, well, 1, this has never happened before. And 2, I have no clue what to do about this because nobody's doing anything about it. So no bouncer. I think everybody was kind of man, we should see what happens. This is the best part of the night so far, So and I'm kind of with them. I love spontaneity. I sort of love this kind. So I'm terrified, 1, and also I don't know. Let's see what happens. So I kind of keep playing, and this guy's just blitzkrieged. He's totally gone. He's looking at me, and he kind of gets on stage, and he looks over, and he's like, "Hey," and I was like, "Hey," and he's like, I'm gonna tell you something, okay?" And I'm kind of sitting there, and everybody in the crowd is watching this happen. And so I'm like, "Okay," and he just kind of slowly ambles over. And he gets right next to me. And he is as intimate as my wife and I have ever been. He is right there. And and I don't know what to do, and it felt good. I'm just going to be honest. He had a really nice, warm breath. And
are you still?
So I've stopped at this point.
Stopped.
I mean, because everybody, we're all in. We're like, let's see what happens. So he gets right here and he goes, "Hey, I'm going to tell you something, okay?" And I was like, "Okay." And he goes, "You listen to me right now. It doesn't matter what nobody in here thinks. You're doing a great job." And so I literally, I'm like affected. I'm like, "Thank you, man." He's like, "I'm not kidding. You're up here singing so good and nobody's listening, but that's okay because you're still good and you shouldn't be sad at all." And I'm getting ministered to. I'm like, "Thank you, man. That means life." He's like, "I'm meant from the bottom of my heart, okay?" And I was like, "Okay." And so he literally sort of gives me this awkward side hug, and he turns around, jumps off the stage, and I am buoyed in this moment. I'm genuinely like, you know what? I can do this. And so literally, I get done with the show, and I remember like looking for him and like nobody could find him. And I was like, oh my gosh, God sent this drunk angel to encourage me. Which then spins off into a million things because I started thinking like, I wonder if that's like a thing with God, like the angels have to get like a little sauce before they come down. So then it sent me on this crazy thought thinking about Gabriel. Like if he had a couple nips before he came down, like what that would have been like to Mary. You know, he just shows up and he's like, "Hey, Mary, whoa, hey, it's me, okay? But just like, chill out. Don't nobody freak out, okay? I got some crazy, so it's him. But that was all from this thing. But it's funny you ask because it really was this sort of like, I was really sad up there. And then God decided to sort of mad-lib my night into this crazy moment that was just wonderfully, wonderfully bizarre and oddly enough, wildly encouraging.
Yeah.
Like it really was encouraging.
Did it, so you said that buoyed you through the night. Were there other nights where you're sad again and then you remember the drunk angel?
Is it bad if like, every show there's some sad point where I'm like in my head about something?
Is that true? Every show?
I think so, yeah. Well, the problem with my brain too is I have a pretty nimble brain, and so which is great in some scenarios. It's really dangerous in others. But one of the things that I have to practice so much with live shows is to really be present, because I'm just everywhere all the time. And so there's definitely moments where you get done with the song and you're like, "Gah, you're welcome." Nobody cares. Okay, here's the next song.
Yeah.
So I think there are those moments in every set that it's kind of like these little these little grievances of kind of like, "Oh man, I thought I stuck that," or you catch the one guy who's like looking at his wife like, "Why am I here? I asked you not to come," and you're catching the whole thing, reading the whole lip. So I think there's every show has some little even if it's just me going, "I'm kind of hungry. I wish I was done," or whatever it is. Some version of that.
One sort of category of sad stories told for laughs that I get from performers is strange venues.
Oh, God.
What do you got for me?
There's a dark realm of venues that it's these colleges, and it's called NACA.
Yeah.
NACA, National Association of College something. Atrocities is what I remember. But it's the weirdest little symbiotic relationship because it happens, and I saw it happen to literally every single one of my friends that did what I did, like a guy on a guitar. Where
Ellie Holcomb told some NACA stories.
Oh, Drew Holcomb has one of the best ones I've ever heard in my life. Like I tell it and give him credit. I'm not like this happened to me. I'm like, I'm going to tell you all a funny story that's not mine, but it's just too funny not to tell. But so you need to ask him about that story. But it's this weird world where it's the perfect storm of these colleges. Someone explained it to me like this. These colleges have a set amount of money they have to spend on performances. They have to.
Yep.
Like, let's say it's $15,000 a semester. They have to. So like, that's a nice little chunk of change, and especially if you're a 22-year-old dude or girl with a guitar, and they go, "Hey, will you play for $2,500?" You're like, I can live off 9 months off that money. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, that's CC's Pizza twice a week with a Ziploc bag, and my life's good. You know what I mean? So you're stuck in this terrible place where you're like, I can't say no to this, but you knew when they would ask you, because it would be like, because the times of the shows would be like noon in the cafeteria.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, man. And it'd be like, you play for 12 hours. And you're like, it'd be something ridiculous, like 2-hour shows. And you're like, I have 5 original songs. I'm 22, and 2 of those are good. So you go do these shows, and they were just the weirdest. Like, I only did probably 3 or 4 of them, but they were all these, like, you were in the basement of the university center at like 6:12 p.m. And I remember playing one show, and the only people there were people playing pool. And, I'm just like kind of looking at them, and one guy finally like kind of raised his hand in solidarity. So like, you can do this, or it's going to be okay. I couldn't tell through the tears, but his and mine. But it was like that. There are so many of those places, but it was so frustrating because you always got paid. So you would you never felt more like you were sort of like, forgive my language, but whoring yourself out, because you just show up. There was already shame.
Yeah, right.
And they sort of knew it, and they sort of felt bad giving you the check, and you'd be like, they just point, and you'd sort of walk in the venue and just plug in, and you're like, okay, here we go, And it was even worse when you'd have one of the worst shows I ever did. I never ever played by myself. Like I hated being on the road by myself. Uh-huh. So I just find friends, because I was in my young 20s, and friends were either like finding jobs, they had time or whatever.
You mean friends who weren't playing with you?
Yeah, just we're like bros. Like, hey, let's go hit the road for a couple of days. And so it was the only time I've ever done a run of shows where I was by myself. And so I show up to this college in South Carolina, small college, and they had me playing in the president's home.
Okay.
So when you walk in, there's 2 staircases that go immediately left and right, and then up. And so, these were the moments that like all the terror I had sort of came to light. Because I would walk in and I was like, oh boy, there's not an obvious place to play. So this means I'm going to be in the non-obvious place. Sure enough, the girl who's always sweet would show up, and she's a huge fan. And she's like, there's going to be 9,000 people here. And you're like, let's count 3 of the zeros off. There'll be 9, and we'll luck if we're 10. And so she would always hype it, and you always knew like, okay. And she had the system set up, and I was on the stairs on the right. So at the landing. That's where my stage was. So when you walked in, you had to take a hard right, and I'm on the landing looking down, and they didn't have a sound guy. So she goes, and so it's just this wonderful moment where she's like, so there's the sound, and I think maybe you just sit there and play. And I was like, yeah, no. She's like, are you crying? It was like that kind of thing. Because I'm literally trying to do something that space-time continuum won't let me do, which is strum and then hear it on the other side of the speakers, because I'm mixing myself. So I'm like running like, God, the decay in here is pretty intense. So it'd be like, just a little more. And so the worst part about those shows is that it never failed. You would have real fans show up, and the sadness that they had, oh God. That's what kills you. That's what kept you up at night. It's like, those are the moments I'm like, look, I'm fine if nobody shows. I really am. I'll play and I'll be done. I'll give them money and leave. But please, God, don't send 15 kids here who are thrilled to see me, and then watch them be sad that they are supporting someone who plays shows like this. I remember like being on that landing, and like I was kind of like, all right, there's like 5 or 6 people, and they were having like a dinner too, like a buffet. So nobody was sitting, but people kind of, sounds great, they're eating. And I just remember like 15 or 20 kids from Clemson came, and I was like, dadgummit, because they all walked in like, oh, there, and then you saw it all at once. You're like, oh, he's right there. And I was just kind of like, look, we all see it, man. Just can y'all leave? Just leave. This is going to be, and then you're trying to do your show, and they don't know where to stand, and so they're kind of like, oh, can we get food? And I'm like, I don't know. Just like, please make this go away. So those were those shows where it was just like, oh, so miserable,
I've heard so many stories from touring musicians, where they were disappointed in the promoter.
Yeah.
I've got to have a promoter on.
Oh.
To hear some of their stories, because they're not thrilled about what's going on here either.
The thing that is so tricky about that is what would happen so much in the early seasons of my career was you would have, this happened, I think, of 2 different shows. One, I'd never played in Massachusetts, I think, and this girl who was at this tiny liberal arts private school. I mean, the whole school may have been 2,000 kids. It was small. But she is an Uber fan.
Yeah.
You know, she is like right? She has like a vial of my blood on a necklace kind of vibe. and like a little piece of hair of my hair that supports it. And so like, you know, she's in and she picks me up at the airport and, you know, and I'm like, oh, how you doing? She's like, oh, great, Dave. I can't tell you how excited everybody is, which immediately like nobody, but keep going. And she was like, I have put up posters everywhere. And I'm like, that is true. And then and she would give them to me. I always loved that. She'd be like, here, you want to take these with you? I was like, no. What am I going to do with these, you know? So you get in the car, and then it was always, and I have laughed with every single one of my friends about this because everybody knows this feeling. And you know it. You know it as much as like you feel the weather change in the fall. It's the same feeling. You know it's coming. And you sit down there like, and you're like, okay. And she's like, so we have told everybody we've got a, you know, 500 person room ready. And I'm just like, here we go. This is it. This is the great descent. This is right into sadness. And you know, she sit there and we told everybody and then this is where you knew it was bad, is she start telling you her friends that are coming.
Okay.
You know, I have a couple girls from sorority. I have a friend that's driving in from Boston, and you're like, oh God, this is going to be 9 people. And the worst part is you're ready because you've done it. So you're like, I've already died that death. That sad ship sailed millennia ago for me. But now I've got to watch you get sad in an hour when I'm on stage, and I know it. I'm braced for impact, but let's push it back 10. And I'm like, okay, all right. Yeah, no, there's 1,000 people waiting to be here in 10 minutes. Like, you know, and she's, 10 minutes, maybe another 5. And you're like, and then finally the death happens where she's like, you can go ahead and start. And it was like, yeah, okay. And she's just the whole show like, you know, and oh God, those moments were just like so hard. So that's what's hard. That also happened. I tell you what, when it gets really bad, I was laughing with Carney about this at one of our hangs. Matt was telling the story where he had this happen to me, but like the worst that would happen this happened to me once, where you would walk into. Thankfully, I wasn't headlining this; I was an opener, but. You know, it was like the gym version of that. So like you walk in and there's 1,000 seats, and you're like, and that was one of those nights. It's like, thank God it's not me that they're gonna look at and be like, what happened, bro? You know. So like, you know, they're always colleges because they have a set budget, so they're not worried. You know, it's not dependent on people buying stuff, and that's why they can afford these people to come play. But I mean, sure enough, when we got up to play that night, there was probably 100 people in 1,000 seats, and you're just like. You know, sorry everybody. Nobody wins because you know that's where people are like, you know, you got to show up and give them the show. I'm like, nah, man. Like because you know everybody's watching you and it's just sad. They're like, dude, chill out. And you're like, oh, go on. And like, hey, there's too much. And you're like, you know, that's like I did this show once at Bongo Java here in Nashville. Like, it's amazing how much I didn't know I had these stories. And you just were like, and I'm like, and then one time. And so I was playing at Bongo Java. It was like maybe my 5th show in Nashville. And I went to MTSU for school. So I had a bunch of friends that lived in Nashville. And they were my crowd for, you know, the first year. And so I was, you know, I had the show, I promoted it, I told all my friends, and you know, it's a 50-person room. It's the upstairs in Bongo Job. It's a tiny room, and I loved playing there. But like, I'm not kidding you, 5 people were there for my show, and all of them were my friends. And so I remember like, this is a true story. I remember starting the show, end of the first song, and one of my friends was like, Dave, because they're meeting you. And I was like, I'm not like, so I stop, and I'm like, yeah. And she's like, hey, can we just go get dinner? And I was like, yeah, we end up, you know, just like, and I was like, you know, done. You know, there was a lot of those. There were like, you know, I remember mom and dad would be like, you know, a couple of the 50 people that some room where you're like, and they're like, it's okay. You know, mom's back there like, you know, trying to give you all this. Ugh.
Oh man. Okay, there was something you just said made me think. What was the question I had for you? You maybe launched to another funny story while I'm trying to think of my question I had for you.
Oh, launch into I'll tell you one of the most awkward moments I've ever had in my life. I was doing a radio promotion tour, which I want to tell you, you get anybody, you could ask an artist today, like go to downtown Nashville and say, you have any like hard or funny stories? Be like, I can't think of any, but all you would need to say is radio promotion. And they'd be like, oh my God, how much time do you have? Because it's just such a nightmare. That whole scene is such a nightmare because basically it's, you fly to all these cities and they have you come in and play for the staff at the radio, at the radio.
Sounds like fun when they do it on 100.
Sure it was. Yeah. Well, no, they go, And Writing 100, you have a few stations that you want to go to because you listen to them or they have prestige and so you're stoked to be there. But, when you're Poughkeepsie or Dayton, Ohio, I mean, God bless all those people. If you are there, I would love to come play your benefit, I promise. But God, you would go do these things, and it was just always so soul crushing because they're not. I did one. I forgot about this story. I forgot about this story. I went to a AAA station in Indiana.
What'd you say? A AAA station?
AAA station.
What does that mean?
AAA is adult alternative.
Okay.
And which is Lightning 100. So kind of like cool. Not a lot of listeners, but really cool music is basically what I mean. So, or not like with the top 40 country, those kind of things. And so I remember getting there and I walk up to the front and it's just me and my guitar. My radio guy wasn't there. And so I'm like, hey, I'm here to play for, Lightning Jack or whatever the guy's name was. He's like, oh yeah. I mean, nobody's really paying attention to me collectively. It's like, I really feel like they can't see me sort of. So they're like, oh, he's back there. And it's a lot of nondescript, like he's in there, like knock on that. And he went there. So finally I find this guy and he's like, oh yeah, Dan. I was like, Dave. He's like, yeah, sure, okay. I am not lying to you. I'm not lying to you. I walk into this room and he's like, well, let's just do a quick interview, And I was like, great. There's this huge round table. So I'm sitting here, round table, and a sort of a mic in the middle.
Okay.
But I can't tell. It's just in the middle. It's not toward me. It's in the middle of the table. So then the guy sits at the Mac right here at his Mac, and he's kind of like, and he starts talking to me, but I can't tell if it's the interview. So he's like, so I'm caught between, I'm like in purgatory. I'm like in interview purgatory. Because I'm like, do I sort of, hey, and I do my thing, and we got in last night, and we played the thing last night. Because he's so low key, and he's kind of, this is exactly how it was. So did you guys get in this morning? Yeah, well, we did. We played last night at the Bluebird here in town, and he was like, cool. How's the road? Man, love playing shows. And I'm telling you, hand on a Bible, we do that for about 3 minutes. I realized that was the interview because he says, you want to play something? And I was like, yeah, a song? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, all right. So I played the song and he's like, cool, man, thanks. And I was like, yeah, that feels right. So, the other one, and this one to me is, I tell this story all the time at shows because eye contact at shows is always so weird. You make eye contact with somebody just staring through the center of your being. So I never, you get locked and then they're like, I go to this, me and my radio guy at the time, we were promoting one of my songs, and we get to this radio station in Boston, and we met, so I flew in, he was from New York, I was coming from Nashville, we meet in the lobby, and he's like, hey man, it's supposed to dump like feet tonight. So, of snow, not literally feet, that would have been weird. There was a plague. It was happening in Boston, guy was judging Boston. And actually maybe still is, but so he's like, here's the deal. Let's meet up in the morning. He said, I'll call the radio station because if it snows, we need to make sure they're even open. We may just have to, cancel today and fly to the next place. So I was like, great. So he calls me and he's like, hey man, radio station said come on by, like meet me in the lobby at 9. And I was like, great. So get down there, I've got my guitar, and sure enough, it had snowed like a foot. It snowed so much snow, but it's Boston, now I do it. So we take forever to get to Panera because you want to bring in like your sacrifices to them.
I didn't know about that. You have to bring bagels.
Coffee and bagels and stuff, is a whatever. So you came in, brought it to, and so we get to the front door of this place, and it's just like we're shedding all, it's because we got all these clothes on. We finally get to the secretary, And so my guy's like, hey, this is Dave Barnes. I'm so-and-so. Can we're here to play for everybody some songs. And she was like, oh, no, there's nobody here. And we were like, what's that? And she's like, no, it's just me. I'm the only one on staff today. And my guy's like, who's like New York. I mean, this guy's rough and tumble. And he's like, okay, well, so it was me that called you earlier. And I said, is there anybody here? And she said, yeah. And there is, I am. And we were like, then that is technically true, isn't it? Okay. And so literally he goes, well, here's some bread. And I was like, well, do you want to hear a song? She was like, I'd love to hear a song. I was like, well, we're here. I'll play a song for you. So we go into the conference room, and I'm telling you, it looks like this table was made from Noah's Ark. It is the longest table I've ever seen. Thank God we didn't do the thing where it's like sitting at the ends. But we sit, and again, we're about this close. And so I realized the error of this decision because I don't know where to look. Because she is so grateful. And she's like, oh my God, this guy's gonna like play a song for me. And it's just me and her and she's just a secretary. She got up and was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do today, much less have some guy like serenade me in the Noah's Ark room. So I have to play and and every time I look up and catch her eyes, she's doing this. Thank you so much. Just like barely audible. And then she'd say things like, while I'm playing. And so I had this like tremendous scar from and now anytime I lock eyes with somebody at the show, all I see is her face and my mom's face going, you're doing great. It's just scarring.
Have you ever played your show and then the guys, or the woman, as the case may be, says, yeah, I'm not going to be able to pay you?
No, God, thank God. That's never happened because I mean, like anybody, there've been shows where my road manager would come back and be like, boy, that almost got bad. And it was like, am I glad I hired you to do that?
Yeah,
because
right.
I'm the guy that'd been like, just don't pay me. In fact, I'll start working here. I'll move here. Just you dishes.
Can I wash
I'll go
dishes?
do. Yeah, literally, I'm that guy. I've been like, I just don't want conflict. Just whatever we can.
Yeah.
No, that's never thankfully been an issue, which I'm thankful for.
All right. I'm trying to think what my other categories. I didn't know about the radio. I didn't know how bad the radio.
Oh, it's.
Things were.
I mean,
this is news to me.
It's one of my favorite, one of the best nights of my life. So we have a cabin out in Leapers Fork, and it's got this great kind of fireplace pit thing outside, and a bunch of my friends. I'm in kind of a men's group with all these country artists, which is so random, but they're dear friends of mine, and I'm like literally the outlier. But because they have the worst stories, because those guys and girls, like the radio grind for a new artist is so intense. Like you're doing numerous ones a day for months. I mean, not every day, but weekends. I mean, it's just a lot of work because radio is the lifeblood of country music. I mean, and so it's very symbiotic. Everybody knows. Few people complain. You just do it.
What you
go do it. And if it works out, it's great. And you look back and go, man, I'm glad I put the time in. So it's a well-worn path. But man, we sat around that fire, and I made them all tell their worst radio promotion stories. And I mean, I thought I was going to put the fire out from how much I was cry laughing. It was just so many terrible. I remember Dave Haywood from Lady A told the story about how they made them meet up. I'm going to butcher this story, but basically the gist is this radio station was like, we're going to make you come play for all these deer hunters one morning at 5 a.m. before they go hunt. And I'm sure it was Kicks Country, Arkansas, Little Rock, and it was somewhere out in the, and he said, sure enough, me and, Hillary and Charles showed up in our geek, because you got to look cool. So you're basically looking like you're ready for a show.
Well, they were dressed up like Lady A. They weren't dressed up in deer hunting
I
clothes.
think they then got in either a truck trailer and I think played while they drove. I mean, it's just one of those things where...
So that's an OSHA violation.
Oh, I mean, there's no doubt. But there's just that world. If you want to just hear some nightmare and later funny stories, we just sat and laughed because everybody would just keep one up. They'd be like, oh, let me tell you about my experience, whatever. Because it's set up for so much sadness, ultimately.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's there's so many moments you're sitting there going, I have made the worst decision for a career. Why would anybody do this? And then, yeah, it's wonderful, again, in retrospect.
Yeah.
But in the time, it's just miserable.
Hey, how would you say, like, how have surely this has shaped your view of your work, the world,
yeah,
people?
Oh, yeah. I think my personality was sort of made for this in some ways because, me being someone who likes comedy and stories and being funny, there's always a little bit of like, oh, this is going to be great later, And so there's a little bit like where I don't even see him as sad because I'm already going like, oh, I got a new bit.
Yeah.
Like, oh, thank you, And in fact, in shows, it's fun listening to Don talking because there was a little bit of that with me too, where it's like if something would happen live that I think some people might have gone like, oh my God, what do you do right now? I was always like, ooh. I remember I was playing a show and one of my songs, a song called Nothing Fancy, and the whole thing hinges on the last lyric. Like the whole thing gets wrapped up in the last lyric. And when I went to sing it, I full throat burped. And not like a bullfrog mating call burp. And I just remember, I'd spent 3 minutes getting me there, and then for whatever reason, that, taco I'd eaten, right before the show. And I mean, it was on the mic, full-throated, passionate, maybe biblical, spiritual kind of burp. And, I think a lot of people that have been like, what do you do? But for me, it's like somebody throws me a prop. And so I just remember I pulled off the mic, and I'm literally going, thank you, Jesus. So I was like, well... And of course, everybody's just like waiting, they're looking at, and I said, well, we all know what happened. We saw that. You can't deny something like that, and I think it's appropriate to talk about it in front of everybody. And so, and so all of a sudden you take this potentially sad or awkward or embarrassing moment, and it becomes this fodder, for something fun and spontaneous. And so I think for me, it was funny, as we were talking about this, talking about you doing this show. For me, it's always been tricky because it's hard for me to call them sad because I'm already going, oh, this is just now what's on the production line, like send it on down, So it's almost fun to have those. It's not fun in the moment because some of them can get really. So I played this show once. My problem with playing live music is I just get really bored really easily, and so I sort of knew early in my career I was never going to be like a road dog because I'd do 5 shows in a row and I was already trying to explode the thing. I was like, what we should do? Let's everybody switch instruments from a song. And they were like, what's that? I was that guy, and I still am. Like, if I do too many shows in a row, like, the people that work with me are like, okay, he needs a break. I'm like, no, I don't need a break. Who loves the Muppets? They're like, okay, we got to get out. Like, what is nudity here? Like, and so I just remember we were in one of these runs. I was playing in Indianapolis, and my sweet band, they were just so patient with me. But I came backstage, and I was like, guys, I got an idea. And I was sincere. This wasn't trying to be funny. I was like, what if I start the show in the audience on my guitar? And they were all like, I'm sorry, what's that? And I was like I sneak out there, and then I just start it. And they were like, there's immediately about 10 things that are a bad idea about that. And I was like, yeah, but what's the good one? And they're like, well, no, we can't find that. As we're sort of, so I talked him into it. And I just remember my sweet road manager, I heard him praying. He's like, oh, Jesus, just let this man. I need this job, and he needs money. So we, sure enough, the band's up there, and somebody's looking at the band, and I start this song, and immediately I'm like, this is one of the worst decisions I've ever made. Because nobody hears me. And everybody's kind of like, oh, hey. And it's kind of like, oh, God. And the band definitely can't hear me. So they're all like, and I'm like, I was trying to sing. And so I remember Paul, my drummer, is just watching my hand to kind of get the tempo. And I'm like, now. And he's like, what? And I'm like, now. And I can't, now. And then the people around me are kind of like, and so then I'm trying to play and walk through the crowd. People are muting the guitar. And the band's kind of like, what? And I'm, now! And they're like, what? What? And I'm like, start the song. So, I mean, it was just this absolute debacle where I'm like going through trying to sing. And I get up on stage and they're just vamping on the same 3 chords. And I'm like, okay, oh God. And it was just like this, like, complete and utter train wreck. And I just remember like feeling like, oh, this was terrible. But immediately after the show, I was like, guys. And they're like, it was awful.
Do you ever get people complaining about how much you talk between songs?
First of all, that hurts. Second, and I get what you're inferring.
I've never known anybody who talks as much between songs.
Well, so here was the deal. It was interesting hearing Don talking about that too, because, my whole beginning was really humble because I had never, ever sang in front of people, ever.
What do you mean?
Like literally.
Like you weren't in church choir?
No.
Weren't at school?
I grew up playing drums, and so I was used to being on stage, and I loved performing. I'd done skits my whole life and sort of pseudo improv and that kind of stuff, but I'd never sung. Nobody knew that I sang. So when I started writing songs at MTSU, where I went to college, my freshman year, my sophomore year, I started writing songs for myself. I'd never played guitar, and all this was brand new, but there's that Barnes thing in me, which is like, if you're going to do it, let's go down in flames. So I was like, why not embarrass myself in the process? And so I started booking shows because I had songs, and I had enough friends around me who were like, hey, this stuff is pretty good. Like, and your voice is kind of cool, and you should do it. So to calm myself, because I would get up there, and I was terrified. Like, I loved the thrill of being on stage, but I was absolutely terrified of singing in front of people. And I'd played guitar for a year, But something in me was like, this is how you got to do it, man. It's like, just jump in and go. Which in retrospect, I'm like, where did that go?
There are lots of other ways
Can
to
I
do it.
please have that back? Like, what happened to that guy? He was around for like that year, and he's like, I'm out, Bonds. It's a good run, baby. I've seen where this goes, and I don't want to be here for this. So I would literally do these shows where I would sing, and I would just be so nervous that because I knew I could make people laugh and tell stories, that was what calmed me down. Mm-hmm. So if you went to those shows, it wasn't uncommon for me to do 5 songs in an hour set, 5 or 6 songs in 30 minutes of talking. But the thing that got really crazy is people liked that. And I'll tell you what, and you guys will know this reference, but one of my biggest idols at the time was Bebo Norman. And if you ever saw a Bebo show, I know the Petersons know this story too well, but he really did talk too much. He would tell you that. Because he was like cute and fun, but he wasn't funny. And so I remember I'd go to shows and I'd be like, wrap it up, wrap it up, And so because he was such a big influence of mine, that was kind of what I knew. That was sort of the pedigree. And I remember, probably a couple years into doing shows where I got more confident, I was like, okay, I got to do a lot less of that. But it was so funny because people really sort of spoke against that. They were like, hey, why aren't you doing as much talking? Like, we want to hear this story, or hey, tell the whatever. Yeah, right. Or the setup for the song was, they knew, and they're like, why didn't you do the setup, But I sort of had this moment where I was like, I kind of need to be able to do this without doing that. And for a few years, I just didn't talk as much, and I played more. And thankfully, like, people didn't love it, but they were like, well, we're here for the songs anyway. But it was really later that I started to introduce that back and understood that sort of my brand, which I hate that phrase, but was this sort of like experience. It was much less, just music. It was all of that.
Yeah,
and then it sort of, I introduced it back, and it became much more a part of what I do.
Have you ever done straight up stand up?
Yeah.
I was thinking you had.
Yeah, we did it. I did it probably a couple years ago. I did probably 12 shows that were just me, no guitar. And then I did a tour in 2018 or 19 where I did 45 minutes of music. I did this at the Ryman. 45 minutes of music, 15-minute break, and then 45 minutes of stand-up.
Okay. My son went to that show.
Oh, nice.
And he told me that you'd done stand-up, but I didn't know if he meant you had literally done stand-up or if it just meant you were talking a ton between songs.
And again, I'm really weird about this, but I like doing things sort of full bore. And so when I did the stand-up shows, I was doing like hour 15. Like, I was going. And I remember my wife and manager both were like, look, this is funny. You need to cut 30 minutes out. Because I was like, well, music shows are an hour and a half. And they're like, yeah, but that's not the same thing. Like, you get tired from comedy. Like, fans are like, yeah, 45 minutes, we're good to go home. And I was like, well, you paid for a show. Yeah. So it was this weird sort of thing, me having to realize that there's a different sort of way that works.
Are you going to keep doing that, or are you done?
Yeah, I think so. I just did a private comedy show this summer that was really fun here in Nashville for a group of doctors, which was super random, but really fun. I really enjoy it. I think I was really scared for a long time that, I don't know, I think comedy is more natural to me because it's just who I've been for my whole life. I mean, not to be like, I'm Mr. Funny, but you just tell, you know how to do it. You just know how to talk and whatever, right? Yeah. And music is so much more challenging, but it's so much more, I'm so much more obsessed with it because I don't know, I just love it so much. So I was always scared that because I would do a little bit of funny, and it just felt like people were like, where I'd do songs, and they'd be like, this is cool.
Yeah.
So I was like, I want to get that to where people like play more songs.
Yeah.
And then, because I just saw, the minute I was funny, it just seemed like it was such a lower hanging fruit for me than music was.
Yeah.
So I was always really nervous to spend too much time in it because I felt like it would just eclipse the music I was trying to create.
So is standing up with the guitar and singing music scarier for you than doing stand-up comedy?
Not at this point.
Okay.
The first stand-up show I ever did that was a legit, like, what I would call my first real show was probably in 2009, 8 or 9. I did it at the Bell Court, the old Bell Court downtown in Nashville. And it was sold out, 400 or 500 people. And I remember being in the dressing room, and I had not my wedding, not anything I'd ever done been that scared.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely terrified. Because, there were 500 people that were, like, raring to go. And I'd sort of put a set together, but I didn't really know I was going to go. And my manager actually came down, and I remember she turned the corner, and she's like, oh, are you okay?
Oh.
Like, not like, oh, you okay? It was like, is everything, you going to make it? And I was like, I'm okay. Just really terrified, but it's going to be okay, and we'll get up there and we'll figure it out. And I did. But so that, so now when I do stand up, it's really fun. It feels a lot. It's just who knows where it's going to go and how's it going to go and what's a crowd. I mean, when they're hard nights, it's the worst thing in the world.
Yeah,
I
can imagine.
You definitely sort of feel like, wow, you people hate me and want to see me perish. Maybe in front of you tonight. So it's a different kind of energy, but I love them both. I think now I finally feel like, I'm sort of comfortable enough with the comedy thing that they sort of feel,
So I'm curious, the stand-up thing, how much is prepared and how much is just, I'm standing, I mean, like, when you talk, I don't think you know what you're going to say before the sentence is over.
Yeah, oh no, ever in my life.
Yeah.
Which is,
and so that's why your
my
comedy
wife's
sets
like, yeah, no, that's my whole life with you. No, it got to be, my manager at the time had a lot of wisdom around that, a guy named Chris DeTrey, and he was always so good. I remember him coming back at one show, and he's like, look, because they kept getting longer, because I would riff.
Yeah.
I'd have the bit, but I'd just riff. I'd add little more nuggets and more nuggets. So by the fifth or sixth show in that 12-show sort of summer, he was like, look, it's really funny. Like, the new stuff you're adding is really funny, but trust that the bits are great and just do the bits. And it was really good for me because I think every night, I was getting bored. So I was like, what would make this funny? Oh, I should tangent on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And before I knew it, you just feel the thing kind of get built out too big. And so I think I was really helped when he was like, hey, it's getting longer and longer. Let's trim the fat. And then if you got some funny stuff, yeah, you can do it, but kind of keep it in the rails a little bit. And so that was a hugely helpful, moment of kind of realizing like, oh yeah, my tendency is just to rip and run.
Yeah.
But that's not really what I'm doing here.
Yeah. It's funny you haven't told any funny, embarrassing stories about comedy.
Yeah.
They're all about, so far, I mean, maybe you have some.
Well, I'll tell you one of them. Gosh, this was so awkward. I did a show. One of the hardest things you can imagine about doing stand-up for me that's done music my whole career is just how to let people know what's happening that night. Because, like, they see me and they go, oh, music. So we're doing the show in Denver, and we'd called the promoter, hey, we're doing this place called the Soiled Dove, which is like one of my favorite rooms, weirdest name in the world, but a great room. And so we told him, hey, this is part of the stand-up tour. He's like, great, we got it. So sold out, it was great. Well, I get there, and I knew immediately when I walked on stage. I was like, they don't know I'm doing stand-up.
Wow.
I don't know what it was, but I could feel it. And I even made a joke. I was like, oh, whatever, where's your guitar? And I did the show. And I got done, I walked to the side stage is literally just right there, so you can hear everybody clear as day. And they started like encoring and yelling songs. And I didn't go out because I was like, that's it. That's all I got. I don't got my guitar. I'm not going to do them a cappella, And that night was one of the hardest nights of my career because I just got ripped apart on Twitter. Like all of these people started tweeting me and saying like, dude, not cool, the bait and switch. Like we drove from, Colorado Springs to see the show and no songs. And this is really frustrating. And it was like, there was probably 15 to 20 of these. And I just laid in my hotel bed like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So my manager was with me and he said, look, let me answer them. And I said, hey guys, so sorry. And he told me, he's like, the promoter was so sorry and said, because all the promo had been me and a guitar.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, I don't know. It just slipped my mind. I'm so sorry. So I was able to say, and he sort of gave me the okay to be like, hey, and everybody but one guy was so cool. And they were like, oh man, all good. We actually had a blast. We laughed, but we'll be excited to see you next time. They were so gracious and great, except for one guy who was a youth director who got his money back. I was like, God, that feels so apropos. But he was just so mad. And he was like, sure, man, here's your $50, if that makes you feel better. But it was, so that when we did the tour, the next one, when I did the half and half, we literally called it the tour where I sing songs and do stand-up tour. Because I was like, we are not having this problem again. And thankfully, nobody really, got mad about it. Comedy is weird. I mean, I'm not a professional, but, it is my experience with it from the 30 or so shows I've done. There is a really weird terror that happens in a set because, I always tell people, if you go, let's say you're in New York, you and your wife, and you're going to go to a random coffee shop or whatever, and Sting walks in with a guitar and some guy's finishing up his set and goes, hey, you guys mind if I play a couple new songs? It kind of, even if the songs are terrible, it's still Sting's voice. It's still his guitar. There's redemptive things that are happening. You can even, y'all are walking home that night and you're like, that's some of the worst music I've ever heard, but God, his voice. Or the guitar sounded so cool. There's something you can take away and still be like, it was Sting. Jerry Seinfeld, which you can see in Comedian, the movie, which is one of the best movies of all time, that documentary, you can get up and you are not funny. There's nothing redemptive. In fact, it maybe elicits the opposite response. I expected something great and I didn't get it. And so now it's not something redemptive. I'm mad. Yeah. And so it's a scary thing when you realize that music, there's always something that you can hide behind to redeem the night or give them something. Stand up, you are real time trying to sort of for me at least, I can speak to my experience. You are real time trying to sort of give them something to enjoy before they leave. Because, you can really feel the sense of, and the pacing is really interesting. That was something I have a podcast called Dadville, and we had Nate Bargatze on it. It was something I asked Nate. I was like, I said, I've dabbled in doing some shows, but man, one of the biggest eye-openers for me was just size of room changes the whole night. Because you go from the Ryman that was sold out that night to 2,400 people, and you have all this time. Because the laugh and applause, which there was a lot of, it'll take 5 seconds. Yeah. And in a comedy show, that's a year and a half. I mean, literally, because you'll get done with a bit, and if you think about it, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5. That's you just standing there. And sometimes it was 10 seconds. So I'd realize real time, I don't know what to do right now. And so you just kind of end up walking, okay, thank you, oh, thank you. But then you're in a room, I did a room in Portland, Oregon, and there's 200 people in there, and it's tiny and tight. It feels like this. Yeah. And so, boy, you get done with a bit, and you're like, we're off, here we go. It's so you're moving. You're And so there's just all these weird things that stand up to me is so fascinating, and it's so every night is different. You have a crowd that loves it.
And there are people in the room who want to see you fail.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think people come to a concert hoping the musicians will do a bad job.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
And there are people who...
There's a little bit of it's like watching someone walk a tightrope across the buildings in New York. It's this is fun because he can make it, but it's also kind of fun because he could not make it. And then I got a story to tell, So yeah, it's weird. It's a really weird medium because you can, this is what's so fascinating about comedy. I talked about this with Nate. You can't, there's no greatest hits. Once you do a tour, he said it so well. He said, this is the way we work in comedy. You do a tour, at the end of the tour, you do the special, and all those jokes are dead forever. Yeah. Rinse, cycle, repeat. And I was like, that is literally, and we laughed. He's like, that's why I hate you guys, is because you do the opposite. You find a couple of good nuggets and welcome to the rest of my life. It's ad nauseum. Here's the same songs you came for last time. And it's great. Yeah. But it's literally polar opposites. And so it's a weird existence bouncing between those because my brain is well, they liked it last time. But it's like Nate was saying on the pod, he's like, but they think they want it, but they don't. Because they know where it goes. I mean, and he also said, which was one of the funniest, I mean, he's a funny man, but he said, that's the thing that people underestimate about bits is when they're yelling the request, they're yelling the punchline. And I was like, that is genius, That's
so funny.
So it's you've already know what the joke is. So it's a really fascinating but very, very different medium than songs are. I mean, you said it yourself. There's how the crowd feels, what they're wanting from you. But there's, I would argue that the feeling for me, of a room that's laughing really hard is a very different feeling than even a standing ovation. There's something, and maybe it's just a season of life in where I'm trying to get better at it, so it's extra rewarding. But it's a very different feeling. It's like there's a power in that's pretty insane,
Yeah. We need to, I do need to wrap up, but I got to ask you a couple of things.
Yeah.
And one is this. It's gone. What was I going to ask you? It was just a
wonderful.
It was
probing,
a great question.
Personal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't have to do with it was not me scolding you for plugging your own podcast on my podcast.
Do you like how I did that? I don't know if you guys know.
I wanted to hear when somebody says something ugly about you on Twitter, you have to ask your manager, can I respond to this?
Well, that night after that show in Denver was really interesting because we were trying to sort of put out a little bit. I mean, it wasn't even a fire. It was like a beginning of a fire. But for me, I just haven't. I don't know. Maybe fortunate's the wrong word, but I just haven't had a lot of that kind of stuff in my career. So it felt like a bonfire.
Yeah, right. Sure.
I was like, what do we do with all this? And so there's a little bit of like, I should probably consult someone before I start responding to things and get myself. And I was only going to be kind and apologetic, but even then it's like, because it's like, hey, do we want to look like we're sorry for something? So it's just all that.
Yeah. I've been in a Twitter beef once.
Oh.
Yeah. Somebody said something ugly about my Flannery O'Connor book. And instead of just ignoring it, I said something back and he said something back. But then this was really sweet. A third person said, hey, I know both of you. And y'all would actually like each other.
No.
Y'all should go to lunch. We're like, okay. So we went to lunch.
No.
We had a nice lunch.
You're kidding me.
Yeah.
Wow, you never hear that.
Yeah. So anyway, well, we need to wrap up.
Yes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So much fun.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
Thanks for listening to the Rabbit Room Podcast Network. Podcasts are just one aspect of the Rabbit Room's work. Here's a quick snapshot of everything else we're working on in October of 2021. First and foremost, Hutchmoot Homebound fast approaches. From Friday, October 8th through Sunday, October 10th, we're bringing our annual arts conference directly into your home. Guest speakers and artists like Malcolm Geit, Tim Mackey of the Bible Project, Sarah Groves, Jason Eskridge, Joshua Luke Smith, Jess Ray, and so many more will be sharing sessions, concerts, and even recipes and other fun extras with us. One $20 digital ticket grants you full access to a custom website filled to the brim with surprises and adventures. You can register at hutchmoothomebound.com. Our fall season of the local show continues on October 19th with Andrew Peterson, David Keener, Dennis Parker, and Zach and Maggie. Due to a recent surge of COVID-19 infections in our area, all remaining local shows will be live streamed only, but you can catch it at the Rabbit Room's Facebook and YouTube pages. Releasing on the 26th is Andrew Peterson's The God of the Garden, Thoughts on Creation, Culture, and the Kingdom. Pre-orders for new printings of A.S. Peterson's The Oracle of Philadelphia will also become available this month. A new online book group for Ben Palpint's Letters from the Mountain will begin on the 18th. You can find more information for that by searching Letters from the Mountain at store.rabbitroom.com. And finally, we're hoping to share a new audiobook of Every Moment Holy Volume 2 this month, so keep your eye out for that. That's it for October. Check back in November for more updates, and as always, thanks for listening.